We have more food in our basement this year than we've ever had before. Starting here with our canned goods, but that's not all. We also have tons of dried goods. We have 3 freezers full of food and a root cellar.
Because we're more than farmers.
As you can see here, most of what I have is tomato products. I have barbecue sauce, marinara, salsa, ketchup, and then chunk tomatoes and some tomato juice. I also have pickles, a little bit of broth. This is mostly just for when we get sick and I don't feel like cooking, and then lots of green beans. The reason that I can so many tomatoes is because Cody gets heartburn from store-bought tomatoes, and they just taste really good, and they're also so easy to can. Tomatoes are very acidic, and so you can water bath can them and it doesn't take that much time. Canning is really awesome because once you have canned a product, you can set it on your shelf. You don't have to take up freezer space or refrigerator space or anything like that. But it isn't honestly my favorite method of preservation. It takes quite a bit of time. It also makes my house very warm in the summertime. We have a very tiny house. And I just, as a general rule, don't love being in the kitchen. So I will share with you a bit later what my favorite way of preservation is. I get asked all the time why my canning jars don't have rings on them. I put rings on my canning jars to hold the lid on while they're canning. But after your lid is sealed onto the jar, there's no need to have the ring on there anymore. I like to reuse my rings so that I don't have to have like tons and tons and tons of rings. I can just have a small amount and reuse them. And I also like to take the ring off so that I know if a jar has a bad seal. I mean, if a lid is only being held on because the ring is on here, and then obviously the seal is going to be bad. Our freezers are a big mess right now. As I've been preserving throughout the summer, I just throw everything in here. And so now that I'm done preserving, I need to organize everything and make so that it's easy to get to throughout the winter time. There's raspberries everywhere, literally everywhere. We're never gonna eat them all, never. Both of our freezers were chock full, and so we actually got another freezer because we just got a beef processed and there was nowhere to put it. So what I'm doing right now is I am sorting out this chicken. When we get our chickens butchered, I like to divide 2 chickens between 3 different bags. When we are bagging our chicken right after we butcher, what I really love to do is put all the backs and necks, pieces that you wouldn't just want to eat as baked chicken. I like to put those into bags, and then when I want to make bone broth, I just take out a bag of backs and necks and I dump them into my Instant Pot. I put some seasonings over them, cover the bones with water. You don't want to do too much water or your broth won't gel. I just like to cover them. And that literally is all. That's how easy it is to make bone broth in an Instant Pot. The Instant Pot has just completely changed this for me. I put the lid on my Instant Pot and I set it for 3 hours at low pressure. This Instant Pot will take, I don't know, maybe 20 to 30 minutes to get up to heat. And then it also takes about 30 minutes for it to cool down and let the pressure off. So that adds about an hour, I would say, to the cook time, but you can have wonderful bone broth that gels really well in 4 hours instead of 12 to 24, which is really awesome. I make 1 gallon of bone broth every single week and use it in soups and stews and things like that. I just really like to have bone broth in our diet because it's incredibly nutritious and I feel like it keeps us healthy during the winter. I like to put the breast of 2 chickens into another bag. So right here is 2 chicken breasts. Not, how do I say that? 2 chickens breasts. What I like to do is then divide the rest of the 2 chickens between 2 bags. So just the drumsticks and the thighs from 1 chicken isn't enough for a meal for us. So I put the drumsticks and the thighs from 2 chickens into 1 bag, and then the 2 breast pieces from the chickens into another bag. I'm putting all the chicken into this freezer because most of the chicken is over here, and I would just like to have all the chicken in the same place. We do 55 to 60 chickens for a family of 6 to last us the entire year. We don't buy any chicken ever. I think that's full.
Full of chicken.
all of this work reorganizing these freezers, and it would actually be easier to organize if we had an upright freezer. But when we got that freezer over there just several days ago, I had actually thought about getting an upright freezer, but there were a few reasons why we didn't. Number one, upright freezers are a lot more expensive. Chest freezers last longer. They say they last up to like 5 to 10 years longer than upright freezers. They hold more stuff per cubic foot of space, and they take less electricity. All of that, we decided just to go ahead and get another chest freezer, and they do work really well. So that's just kind of a tip if you're thinking about getting a freezer to start your own grocery store in your basement.
I have gallons and gallons of strawberries. It seems like forever ago when I put those into the freezer. We use our strawberries mostly for smoothie bowls. I just cap the strawberries and freeze them in gallon bags, and you can see here, very easy to dump into a blender. The other way that I preserve strawberries is I puree them and I add some sugar or maple syrup and I freeze them in these plastic containers. I will get these out and just thaw them, and the kids can eat them with a cookie or cake or whatever during the week. Next up here is raspberries. And unfortunately, I still have a bunch left over from 2022. So I think I will gift those to friends. The main ways that we use raspberries is also in smoothies, like for smoothie bowls. I do make raspberry pie, and I am right now experimenting with some raspberry streusel bars and things like that. But when you have so much of one kind of fruit, it can be a little bit difficult to get creative and feel like eating it over and over and over again. We want to replace some of our raspberry bushes this year with elderberry bushes, or just something to give us more variety, because it's not that we wouldn't eat this amount of food, it's just that we can't eat this amount of one thing. Stay! Next we have broccoli. Broccoli is my children's favorite veggie, and it's so easy. I just like drop these bags on the counter and the broccolis will fall apart, and I put them frozen onto a cookie sheet, drizzle them with some avocado oil and salt and pepper, and roast them until they're kind of crispy and brown. Absolutely delicious. We also really love a good broccoli cheddar soup with sourdough bread when it's nice and cold outside. This year, I had tons and tons and tons of green beans. I filled 2 raised beds with green beans, and I had no idea how fruitful they would be. So I finally just quit picking them because we just have too many. What I like to do when I freeze green beans is I like to blanch them and then put them into individual bags, like as in how much we'll eat in one meal, because green beans like to really stick together, and I don't feel like taking the time to lay them out on cookie sheets and freeze them first before putting them into bags. It just takes too long. I canned green beans until I got sick of canning them, and then I just froze the rest. That's why I have some frozen and a whole bunch canned. Here we have a freezer that is completely full of beef. We just got a beef butchered, and it was quite a wild ride, so we decided to do an entire video on how we get our beef processed and also how we use the different cuts. Here we have raspberry jam. I did about 50 pints of raspberry jam this year for the freezer. We love to have raspberry jam on hand to use for peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. That's kind of one of my easy fast food things. Like if we go on a picnic or something, we pack peanut butter and jelly. And here's some frozen milk. We don't normally freeze milk, but we're drying our cow off right now. We don't love the taste of frozen milk, like after it's thawed. The cream doesn't quite mix in properly, but we feel like having some frozen raw milk is better than just having pasteurized milk from the store.
I just dried off our cow Maddie. She's due to have a calf on like December the 4th, and you want to give them at least a 2-month break from milking so that they have time at the end there to build that calf and be all ready to start milking again then. A lot of people have asked how to dry off a cow, and it can look really confusing or whatever, but it is pretty simple. I've done a video on exactly how to do it all, and I'll link that so that you can watch that if you want to. But for me, she was down to giving only about a gallon a day, so all I had to do was just stop milking her, and then she'll dry off herself. And I just need to come out here about every day and just check to make sure that nothing is too hot or like extra swollen or anything. Like this is looking totally fine.
We only have 3 gallons of frozen milk, and clearly that's not enough to last us for the 2 months until she's giving milk again. But she was only giving a gallon a day, which is barely enough for us the way it is. And so it really just didn't work for me to be freezing tons of milk. So we will just have to buy some grocery store milk.
Under our canned goods here is where we keep our bulk foods. And first of all, I want to tell you where we get our bulk foods. We get them from a place called Dutch Valley. That is not somewhere where just anybody is going to be able to get it. It's like a wholesale company. And we happen to have a connection in the community here where we can get it through them. And it works out really well because it's a whole lot cheaper than anywhere else we've found. They do sell their products retail on bulkfood.com, so you can get it there, but it is a lot more expensive. Azure Standard is also a really good option, and we did some price comparisons between like what it would cost to buy this stuff at the grocery store or to get it in bulk, and we used Azure Standard as kind of the idea of what the price would be. This real salt here, if we were to get that at our local grocery store by the pound, like in a 1 pound bag, it would be $275 for a 25 pound bag, and for a 25 pound bag it's like $75 from Azure Standard. This is a 50 pound bag of rolled oats, and on Azure Standard it's like $56. If you were to buy this in the smaller containers at the grocery store, you're looking at like $178. Big difference there. So a lot of the reason that we buy stuff in bulk is so that we can save money, but it's also so that, I mean, that's a big part of having a grocery store in our basement. It saves a lot of trips to town, and it's that little extra layer of food security. 50 pounds of raw sugar from Azure Standard would be $61. And from the grocery store, it'd be about 86. So not just like a huge difference, but that's still a little chunk of money. And Michelle went through a lot of raw sugar and salt during canning season, so that's why we're needing to stock up again. Also in these buckets, we store rice and beans and spelt flour. And I just want to say that this is a really, really good way to start turning your basement or your garage or whatever extra room you've got into your own grocery store. You don't have to start out thinking that you need to grow everything yourself. A lot of people have asked like how we keep the mice from getting into our food. Number one, I built this house and I made sure that the basement was mouse proof. And then putting it in buckets rather than keeping it in these bags will also make so the mice can't get in there very easily. I also did want to say that these buckets that we're using here are from Home Depot. They're pretty cheap, and I get these lids here for them. They are not an airtight seal. So we are not storing food down here for decades. This is not apocalypse food storage right here, Y2K food storage. This is just to store like from 1 year to the next. We've been doing this for a decade. This is actually how we got started with food storage. I remember like first time going into a health food store and asking if they would sell us bulk rice and bulk beans. And that's how we got started. We put it in buckets. And we've been using these lids for a long time. And we've never used like the little absorber packets or anything like that. And it's never been a problem. One more thing that I do want to show you, something that we don't buy, we actually grow ourselves, is popcorn. We also store this in buckets. This stuff can be shelled and popped just like popcorn you buy from the store, but it tastes so much better.
So just a quick note here, some of you may wonder why we use Dutch Valley instead of Azure Standard, because Dutch Valley is a little bit more expensive than Azure Standard. So in the past we've had some experiences that made us think that maybe Azure Standard wasn't quite the quality that we were looking for. Like for example, the sugar was pretty coarse and I felt like I needed to put it in the blender before I made baked goods with it. One of the other things was that there were little pieces of stalk in with like the spelt berries. If Azure Standard is the option that you have in your area, absolutely go for it. It's not like their products are bad, they're good quality. We just like Dutch Valley a little bit better. Here I have a really big patch of cilantro, and I have found that when you dry cilantro, it's pretty tasteless. So what I decided to do this year is do the same thing I did with my basil. I'm gonna put my cilantro into a food processor with some olive oil and then freeze it in little blobs on parchment paper, and then I can get it out for dishes like rice and beans or any Mexican dish really all throughout the winter and have that fresh pop of cilantro. Here is my tea stash. Drying teas is one of my hobbies here on our homestead. I have chocolate peppermint and I have apple mint, which is our all-time favorite. Apple mint is just really good for any kind of tummy aches or anything like that, and chocolate peppermint then is a lot more potent peppermint, and it's really good for congestion, like clearing up sinuses and stuff. I also do nettle. It has tons of vitamins and minerals in it. It's kind of like nature's multivitamin. And then lemon balm, which is really good for stress, sleeping well, stomach aches, all sorts of things like that. My very favorite way to make tea is with this little tea strainer, I guess is what you call it. You just set it on top of your cup and then you put in however much tea leaves that you want. You can just pour your boiling water right over those tea leaves and let it steep for a little bit. It's so easy to use loose leaf tea in this way. We also have a tea ball. I don't like this as much because it's not quite as kid friendly. It's a little bit hard to like screw it together, especially when it's wet. And another thing that I do with loose leaf teas when we have guests, when I want to make a large amount of tea, is I'll use a French press. You just put your tea in the bottom, put your boiling water in, and then you can just press it after 10 minutes. I also really love to grow as many herbs as I can. This year I didn't do quite as good in the herb department as I should have. I was going to do parsley and oregano and I just plain forgot. So I have basil here. I used a ton of my dried basil already in my homemade sauces, so most of my basil is already preserved. I also have basil ice cubes in my freezer, just like I did my cilantro. Here I have thyme. Thyme is one of my all-time favorite spices. This is like putting medicine in your soups, putting medicine on your steaks and everything like that. One thing that I've really come to realize in the past few years as I've been healing from some health issues is the power of herbs and just simple food. All of the marketing and Western medicine is telling us that natural remedies are, ineffective and weak, and that drugs are powerful for healing, when in reality, drugs can give you a quick fix, and it can be really hard to be patient and wait while herbs do their gentle work in your body. But what our bodies actually want is gentle healing. That's how root issues can be solved, not just symptoms masked. My cilantro and avocado oil cubes are solid now, so I'm just going to throw them into a Ziploc bag. While we are here at the freezer, I'll just go ahead and show you our stash of butter. I love to make tons and tons of butter when our cow is on grass, because then the butter is this gorgeous, gorgeous golden yellow. I don't know how many pounds of butter I have here, honestly.
In here is our absolute favorite way of preserving food in our homestead. This is our root cellar, and the reason that we love it so much is because it takes so little work to preserve something. For the potatoes and the sweet potatoes, we just lay them out on shelves out here in the little bit warmer basement to cure for a little bit and stick them in there. With the squash and the onions, those get laid on the porch for a couple weeks to cure for a little while, and then we put them in here. Nothing like sticking stuff in bags and chopping stuff up or anything like that. It's so simple. Our root cellar here is actually technically not a root cellar. It would be considered a cold cellar because half of the walls are in our basement and then the other half is the ground. A root cellar would be all in the ground. So I built 2 walls in a corner of our basement that are well insulated. The ceiling is well insulated, and so it does stay really cool in here. And there's 2 rooms here and there's 2 vents in each side for air to circulate. You really, really need air to circulate in a root cellar or cold cellar because some of the vegetables and stuff will off gas and you don't want that to stay in here. Plus you need to get that cool air in here to keep it cooler. One thing that I'm doing this year is I put a fan on the end of this one pipe right here. This is where the cooler air comes in, and it can be turned on to pull in cooler air. Right now, while it's still kind of warm outside, I'm basically just pulling in some cool air at night to try to cool it down in here. But once it gets actually cold outside, what I'm gonna have to do is put it on a thermostat so that it doesn't keep pulling cold air in because it would actually get too cold in here. We don't want stuff to freeze. At this point, we don't claim to be experts on root cellaring, but what we do really does work. We've got a lot of potatoes in here. We grew over 500 pounds of potatoes this year, and that was from about 40 pounds of seed potatoes. And we got a bunch of sweet potatoes here. These sweet potatoes and then also butternut squash and onions will last in this room until at least next spring. Some of it will start sprouting by then, but then you're starting to get fresh food from the garden. So this will last us all winter long, even though we're not necessarily doing everything perfectly right. The reason that we have 2 different rooms here is because eventually I want to make this one a colder, more damp room, and this one just a little bit warmer because different vegetables want different conditions. And this book here, Root Cellaring, is a super, super good book. It's really helped us figure some things out. And then we'll go through what each vegetable, what kind of conditions it wants. And so I would highly, highly recommend this to get started. A lot of people have asked us if you could just buy potatoes from the store and store them in a root cellar, and I really wouldn't recommend that. It could work okay, but it's not something that I would want to invest my money in to get a whole bunch of potatoes and put them down here, because Those potatoes, you don't know when they were harvested, and they could potentially be already up to like 11 months old. So they've used up a lot of their storage time, and plus they've been in a lot of light, being in the grocery store and stuff. Light is like just as important as temperature. If we would leave the light on in here, even if it's cool in here, those potatoes are gonna start sprouting. We're not storing our carrots in our root cellar yet because it's not cold enough in there, but once it cools down outside and we can cool that off, then we want to try storing the carrots in sand. You have to layer it with layers of sand and carrots, and then supposedly they'll store all winter long. We've never tried that yet. But for now, we're storing them in our extra refrigerator down here, and it works really well. Michelle bags them up in grocery bags, tapes it shut, and they will store all winter long like that.
We homesteaders love to show off all the things that we grow, but we want to be very transparent with you guys and show you all of the things that we still buy at the grocery store, because there's quite a few things. So this is like the bare bones of what a grocery shopping trip looks like for me. We do buy lots of cheese, hard cheese, and I know that's a little bit pathetic. We have a cow, tons and tons of milk, and we don't make our own hard cheese. I make lots of things with our milk, yogurt, butter, all the things, but hard cheese is something that I have not had the time to delve into yet at this point. Cody is hoping to do some courses and figure this out this coming year. We get juice. Hopefully, eventually, we'll have our own apple cider and our own grape juice. We buy lots of collagen, gelatin, cocoa. This is mostly for Cody's chocolate milk addiction.
Really good.
We do coffee, and I drink an ungodly amount of tea. No shame. We do lots of fruit, bananas, and apples for the kids, lots of snacks. I fully realize that Walmart is not going to be the best quality raw honey, but here's another one of those transparency things. Local raw honey is incredibly expensive. We're definitely hoping to have our own honey, and we do have some of our own honey. We just kind of blow through it pretty fast. So we supplement with this. I love the unsweetened chocolate to put on top of granola bars. Also chocolate chips for cookies and things like that. We do eat some pasta just because we get kind of tired of white potatoes and sweet potatoes sometimes, so we will do some pasta. I also love dates. If you buy these very dates on Amazon, it'll cost you $12 a pack. At Meijer, you can get them for $3 a pack. So these are really awesome for, we call them date bars, kind of like a granola bar with chocolate on top. Peanut butter, raisins for granola bars, unbleached organic white flour to feed my sourdough starter. I have found my sourdough starter does much better with white flour than it does whole grain flour. I don't know why that is. And then we have just kind of our baking things like avocado oil, vanilla. If you want to buy vanilla, buy it on Azure Standard. This is the best tasting vanilla, and it's also much cheaper than getting pure vanilla at the grocery store. I also, of course, buy vinegar, baking soda, baking powder, cornstarch, and then some of my spices like chili powder, paprika, garlic, some of those things. Another thing that we absolutely do is, like, if we're going camping or if we're going hiking or just times when we need a break like that, we will sometimes buy things that are on sale. Here I found some uncured beef hot dogs yesterday for $1.77, which is a complete steal. And so we do definitely buy like some convenience food if we're doing something extra special, but it's very minimal. I really want to inspire you to grow as much of your own food as possible because it is so fulfilling. So I put together a playlist of this last season's harvesting and preserving videos for you to watch next. Oh.